How's that sound?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So join me in a posture that works for you. In this beloved place where we've had so many nights of meditation for so many years. I'm just starting with feeling the energy of that practice and inviting a breath. Let's take 3 big breaths together. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out, and breathing in. And letting go of anything that we don't need to be part of this short period of practice where we're bringing our attention to the body. Checking in with your body. Is there a place where you're holding stress and tension? Is there a place where we can invite more breath? Allowing the breath to meet that place in your body, settle that place in your body. Allow some spaciousness if it's available. Just that simple contact of the breath meeting this place in the body, knowing it, embracing it like a good friend. And breathing in, noticing the length of the breath. Noticing where the breath ends. Allowing the friend, that breath, to help settle the system. Inviting in the goodness or loveliness of this act of respiration. Breath that can pull in like a wave and then allow out any stress or tension that we've been holding. That rhythmic cycle of breath can meet us wherever we're at. Has the capacity always to be a friend, responding and soothing. With the momentum that this breath has helped to generate, Can I notice the other subtle energies in this body? These pointers to freedom in this fathom-long body. Is there pulse? Can I feel my heart beating? Maybe in the hands or in the feet. This indicator of aliveness. Always turn up my noticing of pulse, or turn it down. Coming back to the breath if it ever becomes too much. Can I notice the points of pressure? Where my body is making contact with the floor or with the chair. The hardness or the softness of these elements. Is there temperature here? Is there warmth or coolness in the breath? In the torso or the hands? Where is there warmth? Where is there coolness? happens in the body when I invite my nervous system to trust this breath. That wave in, that wave out. This breath that's uniquely here to support me. In this path of practice. Can I invite this breath to support me in noticing what emotion is present? What emotion is there in the cavity of the chest? In the arms, in the legs. Can I allow this breath to be a good friend, holding my hand in that exploration? Knowing and allowing whatever emotion is present to be here. Welcoming my full experience. Just this body breathing. Now that I've come to know this body breathing, this in-breath and this out-breath, this cycle of support and of aliveness, can I allow my attention with this breath to feel for the other animals in the room, the other bodies breathing. This circle of support for practice. And I watch this breath as I come to hear, to sense, to know. I'm in a room of other animals, other beings just like me, breathing in and breathing out. And if that shifts towards an emotion, just noticing. What's the emotion for me of breathing in community? And I can always come back to just my breath. Supporting my presence. Supporting my aliveness. Many thousands of years, maybe as long as humans have been on the planet, they sat together breathing. Breathing for wellness. Breathing for embodiment. Breathing for the sheer pleasure of being alive. May we always be connected to this most basic of human experience, and always our capacity to heal in community. And sometimes a simple phrase can be a reminder of this, anchoring us in the breath. Tonight we can work with one from Thich Nhat Hanh, which is breathing in, I have arrived. Breathing out, I am home. I have arrived. I am home. open your eyes, take a look around the room at your community of support and practice. Hi, lovely human beings. Let's move into our somatic practice for the evening. I'm going to stand, seated or standing, to feel the dimensions of the body. First, we're going to feel into our length, an invitation into our dignity. I let myself grow a couple inches taller and settle a couple inches down towards the ground. Really feeling for the dignity of my experience. Allowing that center line of length to presence and to grow. A feeling I might have doing walking meditation or just walking around in my world. Moving from length, we're going to move into width, which is along the shoulders and down through the arms, widening out, taking up space, widening a couple inches forward and a couple inches to the sides, widening into belonging to the room, to the community, even widen into the planet. Feeling for that quality of belonging in our width. And depth is lowering down through the rib cage, opening up the back body to what came before, those many thousands of years of humans sitting together, breathing. And all that's made it possible for me to arrive in this moment. My parents, their parents, my lineages, they're at my back supporting this time. It's no small thing to be engaged in a spiritual practice. What made it possible for me. And then noticing the energy of the front body of how am I meeting this present moment? Soften the eyes and the jaw. Can I be an invitation to what lies ahead? And then softening in the knees, even dropping the pelvic floor. We're going to come into center, which is a couple inches below the belly button. Sometimes helpful to place a hand here and at the small of the back so you can really feel for that aliveness. What does it mean for you to be centered? To really feel for the width, the length, and the depth of this body. To be in the full aliveness of our experience. And to really feel for what am I centering on? What matters most to me in this life? What is my intention for tonight and for practice? Maybe even speaking that intention to yourself, to love, towards freedom, towards feeling. And we're going to come back together and we're going to do a mood check. What's your mood tonight? Deidre, can we start with you? I'll move to your left.
Searching.
I have to get ready for the left, going to the left.
Oh, sorry.
That's you. Yeah, I know, it happens to me too.
Settling.
Loathing.
Sadness.
Inquiry.
Stirring.
Settled.
Happy.
Grounded.
Planted. Calm.
Can we allow that full range of mood to be here tonight? That full range of mood that's alive at any moment in any of us. Thanks everyone for the practice period. Appreciate it.
That'd be nice.
Sounds great.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So I have actually a big task in front of me tonight. So I'll see if we can set it up so that it's all like flowy rather than turning our brains into pretzels. So at the Saturday day long, one of the inquiries was to pause and to drop in and to notice when we would get disconnected from our body experience. And so my invitation for you tonight is similar, to listen. And if you notice that what I'm talking about is pulling you out of connection with your own body experience, then pause, drop your attention inward, see if you can reconnect. And if that isn't doing it, then pause me, okay? Because the point is not to turn ourselves into pretzels. That's not the object. Even though there's plenty of opportunity, that's actually not the goal. The idea is to actually let the teaching support our capacity to turn attention towards what is, so that we know where the leverages points are to have more space and less tightness. Okay. So I've got a few maps up. These two maps we've already seen from the Saturday day long, and these are two maps that I just drew for tonight. So my intention is to speak about the Four Noble Truths, which is the map on this over here, and to do it in a way that links together some of the other things that we've been talking about. And with the hope that rather than get it all complicated, it becomes clear how these support each other, and clear how they're different manifestations of talking about joy. Okay? So, one of the things that I want to point out here,
20 years in the monastery wasn't a waste.
the Foundations of Mindfulness is like the overarching topic of what we've been working with. Yeah. So we started with body, and body has many different components to it. The breath, which I love the meditation tonight, just gorgeous. Postures, working with postures, feeling our parts of our body, sensing our organs, seeing the elements, and then there's like 9 different contemplations of watching decay, the human body. And all of that is around kind of getting some perspective on the attachment that we often have about I am my body. And that getting a perspective on it is the objective of that is to help us move into more sense of being able to let our attention rest in what's luminous and clear, letting the mind rest in the mind itself. Okay? So we start with body. It's our first foundation, and it's our ground. It's our place where, when we have a release that actually takes place in our body, there's something that we know in that we can really trust. Okay? Then we have feeling, and this is not emotion, this is pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, which we've been working with. And then there's many of different qualities of the mind, and when we look at the qualities of the mind in the sutta, it talks about, for example, lust, and you see the presence of lust or the absence of lust, or anger, the presence of anger, the absence of anger. So it goes through many, many, many different qualities, and it says, whether they're there or whether they're not there. And then it goes through the categories of dharmas, where we are looking at our experience through different lenses. And one of the lenses is the hindrances, which I had that, this chart over here speaks about some of the And the chart that I sent or gave with Bhikkhu Bodhi's listings talked about the hindrances. And then it talks about the aggregates. We haven't spoken about the aggregates in this course. Sense bases we haven't spoken about, but the factors of awakening we did. And so the day long was built on the factors of awakening, which is here, okay? So these two charts are fitting into here. And then there's the Four Noble Truths, which is here, okay? So there, it all fits, it fits together, it's not random, yeah. So when I look at the Four Noble Truths, this by itself is a complete path, all right? So the Foundations of Mindfulness is a complete path, and the Four Noble Truths is a complete path. And this is part of that. So it's like nesting dolls, yeah? But this nesting doll is a fractal, where it's a small part that actually has within it the whole. Okay? So when we look at the Four Noble Truths, the first truth is that there's dukkha. The second truth is that there's a cause. The third is that there's a cessation, and the fourth is that there's a path. So what I want to do is talk about this tonight, and then just see how, when we work this, what we are actually aiming towards is ease, not contraction. And so this path, this course is on joy, and the Four Noble Truths is a Buddhist way of talking about different kinds of experiences of joy. All right. So let's go and look at some of the way that we experience the First Noble Truth. So the First Noble Truth. So what's interesting is that the four foundations of mindfulness begins with the body, and the first of the Noble Truths also begins with the body. And so when we look at our bodies, you know, if we just tune into our bodies, we can see that our bodies are a mixture of painful feelings and pleasant feelings and neutral feelings. With pain, you know, in my own personal experience, there's been times when I've tried to get rid of it, shift posture, distract myself with something pleasurable, and when I was successful, I felt relief. However, when I couldn't relieve the pain, then sometimes it wasn't only the residual pain that I felt, but a lingering sense that something was wrong, that pain was a fundamental mistake, that something that didn't belong. So the potency of the First Noble Truth is that he talks about the pervasive nature of dukkha, and he puts it on the map as normal, as common. So dukkha as a word is hard to translate. Oftentimes you hear the word suffering, but suffering really isn't accurate when we're talking about some of the more subtle manifestations of it. It's more like stress or contraction or something unsatisfactory. So for the point of this evening, I'm just going to stay with the word dukkha, because it's just, I think we'll be able to, that'll be better. So the whole expression of dukkha can vary. Dukkha comes with having a body that feels unpleasant sensation. It comes with a heart that feels difficult mind states. You know, many of us in this group have had various different things with health stuff. There are a few of us who are experiencing the impact of growing older, just a few. And there are some of us who are, you know, like for myself, just the impact of my mom having passed 6 months ago, you know, the impact of death. It hasn't released its grip from my system yet. So the reason why the Buddha is putting this as the First Noble Truth is helpful is that he's talking about something that isn't just personal, but it's actually inherent in life. And so not only are we in direct contact with our own experience of suffering, but we're also witnessing each other and our family and friends And we are sensitive to what's going on in the world around us, which is increasingly challenging. You know? So the fact that the Buddha speaks about dukkha as pervasive is not meant to be a sentence, but it's part of the diagnosis before the prescription. Okay? This is the main point of the Four Noble Truths, that there is a way out of dukkha. Okay? But to understand the way out, we have to understand how we got there. So we can't just leapfrog over it because it's a good idea. So part of the whole practice of contemplating the Four Noble Truths is to understand how it got there. So I want to switch and move away from our Buddhist map and then talk about autobiography in 5 short chapters by Portia Nelson. Do you know this? It's gorgeous. Oh, it's great. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes me forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend that I don't see it. I've fallen again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault, and it still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am, and it is my fault. I would say I made the choices. It's not my fault. I would change that word. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk, and I walk around it. And chapter 5, I walk down another street. So, you know, this is cute, but it's actually remarkably accurate. And so part of what we're looking at is the different ways in which this actually takes place. And part of the mapping of the dukkha we will see in the cause and the cessation of suffering, the second and the third noble truths. So when we look at the first one, the Buddha breaks it up into different kinds. There's 3 different kinds of dukkha. There's dukkha dukkha, anicca dukkha, and sankhara dukkha. Dukkha dukkha is the pain of pain. It's the pain of unpleasant sensation. It's the simplest, it's the most easy to discern, and it's not very complicated. So when I broke my wrist when I was in Colorado, it hurt, you know? The physical pain was dukkha. The loss of capacity and uncertainty about how I was going to navigate stuff and the vulnerability that I was experiencing was mental dukkha, okay? So dukkha dukkha is the aversion to the physical and mental pain. It's not the pain itself. But the root of dukkha dukkha is tanha, or clinging, the stressful grasping for things different from the way they are. So note this. This tanha is fundamental in that map. Okay? Anicca dukkha is the dukkha of change. And so even when things are great, when we are in the middle of tremendous pleasure, we feel on top of the world, we're feeling like absolutely successful. None of these things can be counted on to last. But what's even more profound is to notice that sometimes even in the midst of experiencing pleasure, we can also feel a subtle anxiety, like a pulling back, because we know that it won't last, all right? So it disallows ourselves from being fully present with the pleasure, because there's like a fear of opening up completely when we know it's not going to be there. So the word suffering is a little bit too dense to describe this kind of subtlety, and yet craving is the root. We want to keep the pleasure going and we don't want to let it go. The sankhara dukkha is the suffering of formations that come in response to the other two kinds of dukkha. It's the despair, the shame, judgment, obsessive thinking, the blaming oneself, or the self-hatred, thinking that things should have been otherwise, that I'm not good enough, that something is fundamentally wrong. So, I just remember the night that I broke my wrist. I was visiting a friend and I walked home, and I was really, really, really careful to walk in the snow on the side of the street. And then I crossed the street to get to my side of the street, and I stepped out on the ice and slipped and broke my wrist. And I knew when I was down, my wrist was broken. I didn't even have to get up to know that it was broken. I knew. But what was fascinating to me was that even on the ground, on the ice, my thoughts were around self-blame and judgment, that I should have taken more care, rather than my immediate thought was, ow, or oh my goodness, or this hurts. You need to be tender with yourself. So the first response was the habit of self-judgment rather than a response of care and kindness. So when we come to the second noble truth, the cause of suffering. So if I could glue this right up here, just like that. The cause of suffering. This would be perfect. Okay?
The tape.
What's in?
The tape. You want to put it there?
Yeah, I think that would be good. Put it on there. Because the second noble truth and the cycle are the same thing, they just have different words. My magic back. Is it here somewhere? Just to the left here. Thank you. So that cycle illuminates things very clearly. And so the Buddha didn't say that all of life was suffering and stop with that. He went on to describe the second noble truth and said that one of the root causes of the wheel is this grasping for things to be different from how they are. And so in each of the instances that I was bringing up, we can see that the cause of suffering was the stressful clinging, wishing it would be otherwise. When I wanted my broken wrist to heal faster than it was, when I wanted the pain to go away, it was my grasping rather than the physical sensation that was causing the dukkha. When I was worrying about traveling or how to wash my laundry or whatever I was navigating, it was the dukkha of how I related to each of these things rather than the specifics themselves. So when I was dealing with pains that only had a few causes, like wrists and bones and swelling, and my not wanting it to be there, it's simple to see that it's my choice. When we're navigating limbic injury, we need to have a certain amount of health and limbic repair before we can engage in contemplating the cycle of dependent origination in a successful way, okay? Likewise, with systemic oppression, there are many, many causes, not just a few, and it takes a great deal of spiritual strength and wisdom to be able to be in the middle of something like that and to use it in order for your mind to open rather than to become crushed by it. So Garchen Rinpoche is a Tibetan Buddhist Lama, and he was interred in a Chinese prison of war camp. And he met a Lama in the prison of war camp who gave him a very, very sophisticated teaching on the nature of emptiness. And it completely transformed his life. Most people don't have the spiritual strength in a prison of war camp to make good use of teachings. It's just totally overwhelming. But the power of the teachings are that if we do develop the strength, that there is that possibility that we don't have to be completely crushed by things that otherwise would be completely crushing. Okay? So there's a window of like a room to move through it without being utterly devastated by it. Now, Harchen Rinpoche, he was a Tibetan Buddhist monk for I don't know how many years before he went into that situation. And when he was in it, he was absolutely fed up and furious for years before he had this transformational experience with this Lama. So even with somebody who had powerful practice and decades of it, it took the right conditions for him to be able to transform something which was beyond what most ordinary people can manage skillfully until something opened up. So we have, there's three kinds of grasping. So in the cause of suffering is all rooted in grasping, which is right around here, craving and clinging, becoming these kinds of things. And there's three kinds of grasping that this shows up in. There's the grasping for sense pleasures, there's the grasping for being, and there's the grasping of non-being. So sense pleasures is chocolate and ice cream and sex, and the grasping on being is like being somebody important, where I can be seen, I am valued. And the grasping for non-being is I don't want to be here, I don't want to see, I don't want to know, get me out of here. You know? Yes.
That's like the wish for existence and the wish for non-existence?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure it's the same thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay. So the third noble truth is understanding the pervasive nature of suffering and the way it expresses itself is extremely useful in terms of helping us focus on how the problem is caused. And so this is this part of the map. It's the flood. It's the red part of the map. Okay. But the third noble truth is the green part. It's the raft. It's the moving from this gripping, this tightness, this movement towards wanting stuff or wanting to be somebody or not wanting to be, to then being able for this whole cycle to start unraveling. And as it unravels, we have different kinds of experiences of freedom. So Ajahn Chah said, if you let go a little, you'll have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. And if you let go completely, you'll have complete peace. And he was speaking to this side of the map. So for me, letting go a little is like letting go of unskillful behaviors that give rise to regret. Letting go a lot is letting go of habits that we have that are not helpful, like the belief that somehow there's something wrong with us. And letting go completely is the idea that there's something in us that's solid and separate. And so when we let go of feeling ourselves as being solid, separate, and distinct, then they're in the right kind of way, then that gives rise to the mind resting in its natural, luminous, radiant nature. And when we are resting in that, there is only peace. And so this whole map is rich. We could spend 10 years on this and we wouldn't get to the end of it. And it fits into this other picture, okay? So, and then the fourth noble truth is here, and that is the path, okay? That's the path that sets us up to be able to do this and this. And in the path, we've got two more fractals. We've got the view, which includes the Four Noble Truths, and we've got mindfulness. And the right mindfulness is the four foundations of mindfulness. So it's like a nesting set of dolls where you keep opening up these dolls and you keep coming to these fractals that has the whole picture in it. And so it's like these interwoven ways in which a small part contains the whole picture. So, without going into much details of all of this because this in itself is a whole thing to talk about, and it's rich and it's deep and it's complex. But the basis of this eightfold path is that there's a whole part which is connected to effort, there's a whole part that's connected to wisdom, and there's a part that's connected to meditation, concentration, mindfulness. And so when we set up our lives in a way where we have these components that are supporting each other, they feed back on each other so that it can give us the support to be able to do what we need, to see where we're at, to make better choices. So when we see that contracting in response to any level of dukkha, no matter how subtle it is, can generate more longing for pleasure, and because pleasure that comes from sense contact doesn't last, inevitably the solution is a temporary fix. In this way, dukkha can precipitate the conditions that cause more dukkha, or we can see that, and that seeing of that makes us feel confident that the way out is through practice. And that's the path of faith. And so when we see the pervasive nature of the way this cycle operates, it can catalyze an interest to find other options where our heart opens, our body relaxes, the mind is free to dwell in thoughts of kindness and compassion and joy, where we experience the different kinds of letting go a little, letting go of unskillful behaviors, letting go of a lot, letting go of habits, and letting go completely, where we let go of this separate sense of self as being somehow distinct and therefore what needs to be defended and protected and fed all these pleasurable things in order for happiness. So I want to invite you again to come back into your body for a moment and just notice the impact of all of these words. And I want to share with you a distillation of the Four Noble Truths. So this map, see, my brain does two things. It does things in complex pictures, and it does things in really simplified ways. I move in and out of both. And Ajahn Dun is a forest meditation master, and the only thing he did was simple. That was the only thing he did. So he took the whole of the Four Noble Truths, all of this, all of these maps, all of it, and this was his understanding, okay? The mind sent outside is the origination of suffering. The result of the mind sent outside is suffering. The mind seeing the mind is the path. The result of the mind seeing the mind is the cessation of suffering. Let me read it again, okay? And this time, relax. Just relax. Don't try and grab hold of the words relax, and just let it flow through you like a waterfall. The mind sent outside is the origination of suffering. The result of the mind sent outside is suffering. The mind seeing the mind is the path. The result of the mind seeing the mind is the cessation of suffering. So I invite discussion, comments, feedback, impact. Yes.
Some teacher of mine said that most people who get started and get really deep in meditation and going on retreats, people like us, it's because they thought that they were gonna suffer less, or they were gonna get a pass, or they were gonna figure out how to not be in so much pain. And so in hearing you frame this, which is just, I mean, so inspiring, and it's like such an articulation of what I've been like hoping to find in my practice for so many years. I'm nervous because I don't know how to hold the like cessation. Like I don't know how to hold the end of suffering in a way that's not about trying to set up my path of practice to get, I mean, I know what you're going to say, but to get away or to get over, to get through. Like I just need more coaching on how to go more directly. Does my question make sense? Okay.
So I think part of learning the art of working with the Four Noble Truths as a meditation practice is to become adept at the various different kinds of craving that we're experiencing. When we're craving sense pleasures, when we're craving becoming, when we're craving non-becoming. And that as we get more acquainted and skilled at recognizing those different expressions of desire, then as we meet that, all we need to do is meet that, embrace those different expressions of craving. Then we don't need to do, it will unfold itself. But what can happen is that we miss that. We miss those cravings, and then we feel like it's up to us to pull up our bootstraps, to wrestle it down, and then we're on some kind of a massive efforting project. And in that massive effort, there's wise to be concerned, because the effort can do good and it can also cause problems. And so in that way, we used to joke sometimes that, when we lived in the monastery, we became sniffer dogs for dukkha, where our attention was just constantly focused and organized around figuring out where the dukkha was actually coming from, okay? And so when we begin to get a sense of the shape of the craving, all that's needed is to just embrace it. We don't have to go into war with it. We don't have to dispel it. We don't have to get rid of it. We don't have to do a number on it. But the simple act of seeing it can sometimes be enough to shift and to allow it, rather than to feed it, it can start unraveling. So when I say this, what happens?
I know, it's relieving, and I know that direction has reinforced for me the idea that I have to earn or be or do something to be lovable or to have belonging. And so I also think, is it possible to find cessation, release, end of suffering through the Brahma Viharas as well? Because I'm so resourced in practicing the way you just instructed us, because it's what I thought was our tradition, like the way, but I think that I'm under-resourced in the other ways, So
when we square deep Theravada practice with attachment wounding, which many of us come to the practice with, then we need to switch up the way that we practice so that we resource ourselves in our sense of connection and our sense of the fact that we can take up space and that people have got our back. And to have that be the place that we lean into, rather than like a laser beam, cutting through the formations, trying to get to a place of emptiness. We need to build the fabric that allows our nervous system to relax, rather than having this monster high-tech machinery dismantling the formation without actually having ground to stand on. So you're absolutely right. What's needed is connection and warmth and a sense of friendship a sense of welcome and safety. And that's the way forward. Totally. Yeah.
I just like to get it direct, thanks.
Yeah.
So how did they get lost in the Theravadan tradition here? I mean, it just seems to me that I just came from Spirit Rock for 8 days, and there's I don't know, even though there's this profession of care, I still deeply sense a coldness, and it freaks me out. Thank you for nodding, because not many people
feel it.
will.
I feel you.
Many people would not be nodding right now. So thanks.
So,
I'm just I you know, and I keep thinking, oh, it's me. There's
Yeah.
you know, I'm damaged beyond repair, and it must be me. But it's like, ooh.
so let me just speak about what it was like living as a nun. As a nun, you know, we were living in this monastery, all bunched up together, and it wasn't an easy or peaceful thing for many, many years, you know. So we had all these magnificent teachings, you know, brilliant meditation masters, regular teachings, and it was tense and tight. It wasn't actually relaxed. There wasn't a sense of safety and belonging, because the nuns, my experience of the nuns the first many early years was that we would consolidate and fracture as we were navigating this patriarchal bias that had us positioned in a position of lesser than the monks.
Mm-hmm.
So the tension would be internalized and externalized. So sometimes we would bond really tightly with each other, and sometimes we would fracture and rupture with each other, and it was just like constant. Okay, so it took us years for us to realize that we actually needed to develop a community cohesiveness, that actually was a value that we needed to cultivate rather than lean into these emptiness teachings that were available to us, readily available to us, but they weren't actually helping. Okay? We did incredible work, and you know, it certainly never was perfect by any stretch of anybody's imagination, but by the time I left England, there was cohesiveness. And when there was cohesiveness, we had the ability to embrace each other. I felt that the sisters had my back. I didn't feel like I was on my own. So that cohesiveness supported us as we moved between our retreat experience, where we were in solitude, and our daily life experience, which was just the routine that we normally had. Okay? Coming out of that, I have a deep appreciation for the value of creating community cohesiveness. But I also get that if you're valuing the teachings on emptiness and you didn't suffer as much as we did as nuns, you might miss the fact that it doesn't feel cohesive. Okay? And so part of it is that there's a cultural mashup. These teachings came out of India 2,600 years ago, where there was no sense of separate person. And so in order for people to have perspective on who they were, solitary practice was a phenomenal contrast to this amazing experience of being embedded in village and clan and work and culture. There wasn't a sense of separateness. So that in that context, it was hugely helpful in being able to see the characteristics of personal self, because it wouldn't necessarily illuminate when you were embedded in all of this other thing, you see? But you transpose that 2,600 years later with the level of rupture, the level of trauma, the level of family fields that are in disarray, and you've got a completely different animal on your hands using something that's designed in one context in another context.
So the teachings on emptiness are so sparkly and so like cool that they attracted everybody's attention, and the sort of Brahma Vihara's community building, I've got your back feeling kind of got lost. Is that what you're saying? Because the teachings on emptiness are pretty sparkly, they're pretty attractive, and they even offer at some level a kind of hope of bypassing all the shit.
Totally, because all you need to do is understand emptiness and it's all sorted out.
And it's all cool.
That's right.
And all that muddy, awful stuff is, you just sort of like fly over it.
I think there's a piece about dismissive attachment in here.
Yes, please. Speak.
Like we were talking about it, I can't remember, we were in the car and we were talking about the monastery and dismissive attachment. I think it has to do with Spirit Rock as well. So someone with dismissive attachment had experienced neglect when they were a child, but doesn't actually remember that, and idealizes their parents and idealizes themselves, and then discovers meditation, and particularly the like this path of emptiness, which if you actually don't have a lot of feelings or a lot of memories of that early trauma, concentration is really easy. And so then you actually are using the practice to bypass your healing, because it's actually a path of ease, because you have such a natural tendency towards concentration practice. And that's how the Brahma Viharas get just left by the wayside. Mm-hmm. But you're also bypassing all of your own suffering.
But in the wrong kind of way.
In the wrong way, yeah,
Right.
Not in a good way.
Right.
In a way that is...
In a way that leaves you not integrated and not a feeling of wholeness, yeah.
But also when you come across those who are actually in touch with the trauma of not having that contact and attachment, right? The wounding of the attachment wounding, you're also going to be like, that's less than. Mm-hmm. That's
an inferior form of practice.
Inferior.
And that came up in the monastery a lot, so that there was this whole thing about therapy that emerged, and it was absolutely split down. The people who were doing therapy were doing a lesser form of practice, and that this emptiness stuff was the path that the Buddha taught, and that was all that was, if you were really a good practitioner, that was all you needed. Mm-hmm. That didn't come through the nuns. The nuns were wiser than that. We understood the absolute necessity of the psychotherapeutic work that we were doing. So we didn't split in the same way that the monks did. But the nuns, because of this other thing that happened, we couldn't hold it. So that the monks fractured, so that there were lots of monks who were doing this deep work of trying to integrate that. But because they were ostracized, they left. Almost all of them left. They almost all disrobed, because they were ostracized and put down and shamed for doing this deep psychological work, as being somehow not actually practicing the path. And so
wow.
So our task is not to follow the mistakes our teachers or the people who are put up as saying that these are the people who know how to do it, but to actually have the courage to say that there's certain kinds of things that absolutely don't make sense to me, and I'm not going to do them, even if everybody in the world thinks that that person is completely enlightened. I know that that's not the right way. And to have the confidence and trust to know that what's really important is to develop friendship that's more than just superficial, that actually sees you and touches you and holds you and you and you and you, and we can trust it. We can relax into it, that you are going to hold me, that I will hold you in a way where our nervous systems can start to relax. When our nervous systems start to relax like that, we're dealing with a completely different capacity to reflect than when they don't. And why these practice centers, or why the teachers, because it depends on the teacher, you know. Mm-hmm. How they come through this where they don't understand. Every one of them is going to have their own story. But I've taught with Lev, and I've taught with Renee, and I've taught with a few other people who understand it. I've taught with Deborah, Eden Tull, and I've taught with Tanya. They understand it. And so when you create a Dhamma environment that is endowed with a sense of holding, it does a very different thing to your system than when it doesn't. And so I guess what's needed is for people who understand this need to be articulate about it, about what happens when it's present, what happens when it's absent, and to, like a dog, just, you know, dogging for your needs, just not give up until it's like, no, I need it, because it's like, you know, the nervous system is not relaxing. And so if the situation or the culture or whatever is not set up to take care, then find workarounds so that you can get your needs met in spite of the culture, you know? Because it's not like, we're not talking about like, you know, having a feast of ice cream. We're talking about getting our basic needs met so that we actually can apply the practice. So,
well, why did these centers here develop this way? So, do you mind if I kind of include the discussion you and I had coming home on Saturday? It's never said we're going to help you find your own way. It's always said we're going to tell you how to do it, right? And that seems to me that's fundamentally wrong. You know, it's always said this is how you do it. You know, they treat it like a perpetual beginner's retreat, and after people come back for 10 or 15 years and they're still getting the same fucking instruction, you know, it's like, shouldn't somebody figure this out? You know, but, you know, it's insufficient, or it's not going to be the same for everybody, or it's not, certainly people who are up in front in Spirit Rock know that 25% will have this experience and 30% will have this experience, and they should bring up this topic. Maybe you were saying something more limited than I'm trying to say, but each person has to find out what's going to work for them, including not just the straight Burmese warrior approach to all of this stuff. But that's never the starting point. That we're going to help you develop a skill set so you can decide what is the practice for the practices that are going to be most informative for you. It's always presented. We know what to do. If you just keep on doing what we tell you long enough, then it's gonna work out. And someone like me, after I do this for 10 or 12 or 15 years, say, this is never gonna get there for me. You know, but doing it the way you told me to do it, it's not doing it. You know, and it seems to me you're sort of in a way potentiating people to trust their own deepest instincts in this practice.
So my own personal experience is I spent 20 years meditating before I deviated even in the slightest bit from the traditional classical Theravada teachings.
Yeah.
But what I did was I recognized that I didn't think more of the same was going to end up with a different result, and so I needed to develop parallel paths or practices to help me address some of the stuff that wasn't shifting with the things that I was doing.
Right. So, but I think I'm fundamentally agreeing with you, but since you hung in there for 20 years, you probably came up with a much more refined idea that you had to do something different, where someone like Judy or myself are still saying, well, I don't think what you're telling me is really the whole thing that's going on here. And why don't they recognize? Why don't they recognize
But
that?
I felt like I was an absolute rebel.
Yeah, I know, because
You know, because I wasn't believing the Pali Canon and thinking that that was the only tool that I needed. And so I did it in secret, you know, I didn't talk about it. It was like completely undercover. And until I had more confidence that what I was doing was actually helpful and helping me and things were opening up and shifting. So I freely speak about the fact that I don't feel like it's my job to tell you.
well, it's not a critique of you.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
But why more people don't do that?
But why don't more teachers do that?
That's
Because
what I mean, because I
yeah.
think that there's still, you see, what's needed in order to get to the place where I'm at, you have to go through a crisis of faith. And the crisis of faith is the crisis because I started this believing that all I had to do was follow the instructions the way they were given to me, and that was all that I needed to do. Everything would resolve. That the teachings were complete. Like I just said tonight, the Foundations of Mindfulness is a complete path. The Four Noble Truths is a complete path. I said it twice or 3 times tonight. And so I believed it with every ounce of veracity in my system that these are complete paths. So if they're not complete in coming to the complete end of suffering, it's not that there's something incomplete with them, there's something wrong with me. So I had to get over the fact that I had taken this as a belief.
Yeah, it's being taught as a belief.
Yes, in order to actually square my direct experience, which was that there were some things that actually were not mapping on this complete map, that I needed different maps. So but my fundamental belief and my fundamental aspiration is not to be a Buddhist. My fundamental aspiration is to understand dukkha and find the release of it. And on that level, I'm radical. Anything goes. Anything that works for me, I'm willing to try, okay? And that sets me apart from many classic teachers who are identified as being Buddhist, okay? When you are identified with something, it limits your capacity to explore the edges of it, the shadow of it, the alternatives to it, the parallel paths to it, because that's not who you are. I never did that. I never said, I am, well, I mean, I did for 20 years, but after that it was like, I didn't hold this. This is who I am and I can't go outside of this box because that's not who I am. So it's fascinating because it's clear that one of the problems is that people create an identity around what being a Buddhist is when the whole point of the Buddhist teachings is to look at the nature of identity. Okay? But that is absolutely human nature.
I think we're all agreeing with you, but it's still like...
It's a little gobsmacking. Yeah. And I don't know other than to do what I do and to speak about it in whatever ways that I can and whatever venues that I can to encourage each of you to find your own path, you know. And no matter how wise somebody is, no matter how enlightened they are, you have to find your own path.
Yes.
Don't ignore what they're saying in the sense of write it off. But in the end, you and you and you and you have to find your own path. And my joy is to help you in that, you know. That's my joy, is to help you have confidence in your own path. Yes, please.
So I think it's that I completely believe that's true. And to be able to do that within the safety of a Sangha, that your Sangha doesn't have to be all the same. You don't all have to do it the same way. My experience with Spirit Rock has really, actually, I guess, been quite different. I've had many retreats where a teacher said, this is a suggestion. Try it out, see if it works for you. And if it does, incorporate it into your practice. And if not, let it go. I always heard that. I always heard that they were, here's a tool for your toolkit. That was a very popular little thing that they did for a while. You know, you have all these tools, which is a great idea. And I think, certain select teachers may say, and maybe it is more people closer to the Southeast Asia, but like I say, I've felt my teachers were very permissive and encouraging of exploration.
So I guess the main thing is whether we, not so much to figure out how different retreat centers have been created the way that they are, but to begin to learn how to work the system to our own advantage. And how to, like, if what is missing is a sense of a relational field, is to figure out if there's a way to bring that with you when you go on retreat. Like, what would support you to feel like you're held and you're safe and you are in a loving embrace? What would you need? Would you need to have contact with your buddies here? What would you need? And so as a living inquiry, what would you need in order to make it work for you? And then to stay open about communicating what does work for you, to see if there's ways that it can start to grow in the culture. But part of the reason why I'm just delighted with this format is because it works. You know, we are creating a relational field that is cohesive and where our nervous systems can relax. We are getting to know each other better so that we can be more attuned in our mirroring and our meeting. It is a context where we can take teachings and go into more depth. It works. I'm watching you grow and shift and change and open and navigating amazing things, you know. I'm watching it. It's working. But this is a different model. And this model is like, you can't do this with 300 people. It's working because it's a small group of people.
Yeah.
And it's a small group of people means that it's a kind of like a special privileged situation.
Yeah.
Because, you know, fancy teachers are not going to sit with a small group of people for 4 months because they're too busy being fancy.
Making money.
And it's sort of like expropriated some parts of the monastic model, but you don't have the interview every day for 10 minutes. You don't have this kind of intimacy with the students, right? So it's like it just can't work. There's 2 or 3 teachers for 300 people, you know, and they could barely remember the names of the people in the group, let alone know what their experience is. And this is, I think, a huge misrepresentation of what's possible for people. I mean, you have this big setup, you say, well, the Buddha got to this fantastically awakened place, he even discovered the way to get there, and you're here and you can't even figure out what this guy must have experienced. And he said, but if you just keep on doing it this way, you'll get there. You know, so it's a huge setup for the new students, and then someone's got to shine a light on this and say, okay, well, after a while, some fraction of you will be lost and confused after 10 or 15 years, you know. Some of you might be like Deepa Ma, you know, and 5 days in the monastery in your first stage awakening, but pretty much nobody is.
On the other hand, if I may, for beginners, it's good that, because I teach a language, you don't explain the whole language to begin with. You start with simple rules and some a simple practice to begin with, because otherwise you just overwhelm people. So you got to start with something.
And you're kind of stuck with the format where I guess you could start restricting who can come to what retreat based on their level of experience, so you can start, but there's a certain amount of it that pretty much you have to say the whole thing from the beginning again for a large number of people, so it's kind of hardwired into the way the system works there.
And so we're here. Very good.
I know it sounded a bit angry, it sounded a bit angry, but it's just like, I just feel like it's being misrepresented.
Do we need to shift? Yeah. Okay, shift gears.
All right, we're gonna do a little bit of inquiry. We're gonna do groups of 3. So, 3, are you okay, Amanda, being part of the group? 3. And then, similar to what we did last Wednesday, where you go around and do a kind of a quicker answer, a couple sentences to each, and you keep going around answering the same question until we shift to the next question. And all, so we'll have 3 minutes per question. So the first question, any questions on the format?
So it's not each person has 3 minutes, it's that.
No, you're gonna,
goes
each
around.
person is gonna give a couple, like a sentence or two, go on to the next person. So you might actually in 3 minutes go around more than once.
Right, thanks.
And you're gonna start with the person closest to me. First question,
And then we go clockwise.
go clockwise.
What's clockwise?
You.
Okay. First question, where in your body or mind do you see the cause of dukkha? Go.
Somebody died from the show.
Yeah.
Completing this plot. Second question, continuing the same process. What happens when you bring wise attention to the cause of dukkha? What happens when you bring wise attention to the cause of dukkha?
Intention.
Watching.
Just wrapping up that thought.
This is my aspiration, this is what I want to do.
Somebody
And
that's-
so then I'm more able when I surrender or slow down to actually have that wise way.
That's good. Wise intention.
One more prompt. The last one is name a type of joy you feel now.
Oh.
Like right now?
You get to pick what kind of now.
You can define what the word now means.
This year.
You can also define what joy means.
You get to choose.
Name a type of joy you feel now. Closing circle. So let's stand up.
If I got you, be
Just let's go ahead and hold hands and feel into the sense of connectedness. Please close our eyes for a moment. Feeling sense of cohesion, connectedness, belonging. We take a few breaths together, breathing out and in. Another inhale. And one more. Now we open our eyes again. Let's share just one quality that we're taking away with us. I'll start grounding. Mudita.
Happy.
Cuddle puddle.
Belonging.
Joy. Love.
Soothing.
Wisdom.
Giddiness.
Connection.
Should we do very good, very good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we do it
Let's
holding
do it.
hands?
Can we do it holding hands?
Ready? Very good! Very good! Yay! I really wanted to do it connected. Thank you for indulging me.
That's good.
Quick dedication of marriage.
Okay.
Oh, great.
May the benefits of our practice together and our inquiry and investigation, may these benefits carry forward in our own lives. May they ripple outwards to the people in our lives and beyond, to communities around the Bay, around the country, around the world. May beings everywhere, human and non-human, seen and unseen, be safe and protected from harm. May all beings everywhere know happiness, joy, and comfort. May all beings be healthy in body, mind, and may all beings everywhere know freedom and liberation.
Can we have a little summary of upcoming things now? Next Wednesday is a potluck?
No.
Oh.
Next Wednesday is the day
It's
before Thanksgiving,
Oh,
so
okay,
there's
yeah, yeah.
no meeting.
Right,
Today, this is the last meeting here.
yes.
Then we have a meeting on December
Fourth.
4th at Tom's
6:30.
house.
At 6:30.
At Tom's house.
Up.
And then on the 7th, we have our last day long.
So there's two more gatherings. 2 weeks from tonight at Tom's house at 6:30, and then the 7th